Alright, so in this video we will be discussing the glandular epithelium. So we'll look at some of the characteristics of the epithelial tissues that produce secretions. So we'll begin first by talking about what a gland is. A gland can mean several things, or could be several different structures. It could be just one cell. So many of the mucus glands are just a single cell. Or they could be a cluster of epithelial cells, but they all make and release a secretion. And there are two kinds of glands: endocrine glands and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands secrete their fluids, the secretion that they make, directly into either the extracellular fluid around the cell or the tissue that is making the secretions, or they can send it directly into the blood. And we talk about these secretions as being hormones or chemical messengers that send or that carry a message to other parts of the body. And so eventually the hormone, if it's secreted into the extracellular fluid, makes it into the blood and is carried to the target tissues wherever they are. Now, not all the endocrine glands are derived from epithelial tissues. Some of them are derived from nervous tissues instead. So that's all we're going to say about endocrine glands for this chapter. We'll spend a lot more time talking about it when we discuss chapter, I think it's chapter 13, which is all about the endocrine system. The more important material for this chapter is the exocrine glands. The exocrine glands, rather than secreting into the extracellular fluid or into the blood, they produce their secretion, and it goes into a duct, and that duct funnels the secretion up to the apical surface of the epithelium, either the skin or inside of one of the hollow organs in the lumen. So some examples of exocrine glands include sweat glands, salivary glands, the tear glands, mucus glands, acid glands. There are a number of different exocrine glands. A lot of the digestive glands that are associated with the digestive system, they produce exocrine secretions as well. So as we talk about these exocrine glands, they may be, as we've said before, just a single cell. Now, of course, there is no duct, but we still talk about them as exocrine glands because they're releasing the secretion up to the apical surface of the tissue. For example, the goblet cells that I introduced you to in the previous video are an example of a single celled or unicellular exocrine gland, and they produce a glycoprotein that, when it mixes in water, it forms mucus, and that glycoprotein is called mucin. So mucin is the actual molecule, but when you mix it into water, then it forms mucus. And then there are the multicellular exocrine glands, and they're, as the name suggests, composed of many cells. And so in these multicellular exocrine glands, there are cells whose job is to produce the secretion. Those are the secretory cells. And then there are the cells that form the tube to transport the secretion up to the apical surface, and those would be the duct cells. So the next little bit of information will look at the different kinds of shapes, so we can classify these multicellular exocrine glands based on their shape, their structure. And it's done basically or primarily around the duct structure, although we'll also look at some classification related to the secretory components as well. So a simple exocrine gland is one in which the duct portion of the gland does not branch, and there's only one secretory unit or area, region, in the whole gland. So here are the duct cells, say. So, and this is a simple gland. Here's the duct cells, and then these are the secretory cells that produce the secretion. So only a single duct, doesn't branch, and a single unit of the secretory cells. Again, here, no branching at the duct portion, and then it's a single unit. It all feeds back into the same duct. So it could be, here we'll see. We'll discuss in a minute the classification based on the secretory portion. Again, simple because there's only one duct, no branching. Same here, one duct, no branching. But if the duct portion branches, then we refer to that as a compound gland. So here we have one branch, a second branch here, and then a third branch here. And then the same in this drawing. So 3 branches to each of these. Now, it's not always 3, of course. But when we get down to each branch, it ends in its own secretory unit. So salivary glands are an example of this kind of compound duct. Mammary glands are also compound. While something like a sweat gland is a simple duct. All right, so there's some examples. Now, we can also classify based on the shape of the glandular region itself. And the shape of the gland may be tubular, which is what we see here. Tubular. This is also considered tubular. Each of these is a single tube. Here is a tubular gland, but it's coiled. If, on the other hand, the secretory unit resembles a round bubble or a little grape-like cluster, that's described as being alveolar. So here these are tubular because they are longer than they are wide. And these are kind of round or grape-like, so they're alveolar. Yeah. Okay, so we can classify exocrine glands first on the shape of the duct portion, secondly on the shape of the secretory portion, and then there's another way that we can classify them, and that's based on the way they produce or release the secretion from the cells, from the secretory cells themselves. And so these are the pictures from the book. So if you've got your book, you'll see them a little bit larger. But there are 3 kinds or methods of secretion. There's merocrine secretion, apocrine secretion, and holocrine secretion. In merocrine secretion, the cells remain entire. They don't break up in any kind of way. And instead, they release their secretion by exocytosis. So a bubble, a vesicle filled with the secretion is produced inside the cell, and that vessel bumps up against the cell membrane, and the cell membrane and the vesicle membrane fuse, and then the secretion is released to the exterior of the cell and into the duct portion of the gland, and then it's secreted up to the surface, up to the apocrine surface. Salivary and sweat glands do this. They release their secretion by exocytosis. Apocrine secretion happens as the secretion accumulates beneath the apical surface of the cells that are most superficial. And eventually, the entire upper apical portion of the cell pinches off, and the secretion is released as a vesicle. But it takes away a large portion of the cell itself as it pinches off. And this is the way that milk is released from the cells that are producing them in the mammary gland. And then finally there's holocrine secretion, and in which case, if it's a holocrine form of secretion, the secretion accumulates in the entire cell until eventually the membrane itself ruptures, and that releases the contents of the entire cell. So then the ruptured cell has to be replaced from by the cells that are found toward the basal portion of the tissue. And this is the way the sebaceous glands of the skin release their oily secretion. It's just by the whole cell disintegrating and the secretion being released. So with merocrine secretion, we see exocytosis. With apocrine secretion, we see the pinching off of the apical region of the cell. And with holocrine secretion, the whole cell, that's how I remember that. Holocrine is the whole cell rupturing to release the secretion. Apocrine, just the apical region, and then merocrine by exocytosis. Okay, so here we see some of these holocrine glands that are associated with a hair follicle. And so here are all the gland cells. And as they fill with their secretion, then they rupture and the material is released into the tubes that feed into the hair shaft. So I thought that was a good picture kind of describing how this happens. And you can see these cells as they're enlarging and filling with that sebaceous secretion here. These are the enlarged cells that are getting ready to explode with that secretion. And then finally, within the merocrine glands, we can classify the exocrine gland by the type of secretion that it produces. And so this is used, again, only with merocrine glands. And the primary types of merocrine glands that produce these secretions are the serous glands and the mucous glands. So serous glands are the glands of the serous membranes that produce serous fluid, which is a watery fluid that has in it a high concentration of proteins, mostly proteins that are enzymes. And the serous cells of the visceral and parietal membranes in the thoracic and abdominopelvic cavities, so the pleural membranes, the pericardial membranes, and the peritoneal membranes all have in them these serous glands that produce the serous fluid associated with each of them. And mucous glands produce mucus, of course, as we've talked already, which is a thick, rich fluid that has a lot of that protein mucin in it. And mucus cells and goblet cells are found in the digestive, respiratory, and reproductive systems. So here we see goblet cells that are associated with pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And they're producing that mucus secretion. And here we see the mucus glands that are associated with the sublingual gland, which is a salivary gland, and they also produce a mucus. And so here are the cells. You can see the nuclei. Here are the cells associated with them, and they produce their secretion and secrete it here into the lumen of that mucus gland. And here is a parotid gland, which is also a salivary gland, and this is one that's producing a serous fluid that's associated with, or not, yeah, I guess it's a serous fluid that's also associated with saliva. So it's a very similar kind of high enzyme fluid. And here's the lumen of this particular gland. And again, they're going to release by exocytosis their thin, watery saliva into that lumen to be squirted out as the body is calling for lubrication of the food that's being chewed in the mouth. All right, so there we've seen it, the exocrine glands, a discussion of their shape and the classifications of shapes based on the duct portion and based on the glandular portions of these glands, and then also classification based on the method of secretion, and then for Marroquin glands, a discussion of how serous and mucus glands, the fluids that are being produced there. All right, so I think we're done with this one.